Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Chief, I don't think you had a statement prepared or anything, did you?
No, they got the release, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
They got the release, so.
So I think just out of the gate, Chief, you just kind of explain your reasoning for going down this road.
Right. Well, a couple things. One, appreciate you folks showing up today. One of my commitments to my goals along the lines of crime, reducing crime and the fear of crime through community engagement and enforcement. Another one of my goals being around transparency and accountability, and then of course around professional growth and development. I believe this policy helps in all those areas, primarily starting today with just transparency, and that we're making a change to this very important policy. I see the significance of it and wanted to make sure that the community is aware of it. Now, we have followed our process in policy implementation, which includes a time for the community to weigh in, so it's not as if this hasn't been done in a public way along with all our other policy procedures. But I knew the significance of this change was enough that I wanted to make it available also publicly here with you folks today. As I said, I see that this policy change fits into my three goals, primarily, first of all, around reducing crime and the fear of crime through community engagement and enforcement. And enforcement of criminal behavior sometimes involves stopping cars, sometimes involves having to chase people. And several years ago, the Police Bureau, along with a lot of agencies in the country, made the decision to make pursuits more restrictive. And there's good reasoning behind that. And the Police Bureau supported that as well. My belief is, as we've seen the increased amount of crime and criminal activity, the videos I think we've shared that demonstrate the reckless, dangerous driving we're seeing, whether it be from people involved in street racing, stolen vehicles, burglaries, etc. I believe that if we also have developed a lot of new skills in our line of work around pursuit intervention techniques, mission planning, the use of our air support unit, ways to mitigate some of the risks associated with just chasing people at high speed. So part of the reasoning for this policy change is to give us a little bit more flexibility to be able to pursue suspects that we maybe not have pursued in the past because of the restrictions in the policy, which lend itself to ultimately hoping to reduce crime and the fear of crime. And around transparency and accountability, as I said, doing this today publicly with each of you as well as with the organization. And finally, around professional growth and development. That's why Captain Channing is here. We're doing this in conjunction with our training division. We'll be providing our officers, our supervisors with greater amount of support to understand this new policy. And actually, what gives me confidence in this is the work that I have been seeing since I've been back in just a short period of time, to trust our officers and our sergeants to make good choices, good decisions, always prioritizing life and safety for the community over the effort to try and catch somebody. So this is not a change for us in the sense that we're going to be dismissing or minimizing or mitigating, whatever term we want to use, the inherent risk that comes with chasing vehicles. Certainly life safety and the priority of safety of our community is paramount, but I also think there is space for this. We're seeing a lot of violence come from some of these charges that typically we haven't engaged in pursuits in. We have the right mitigating factors in place, then we're going to go ahead and catch people and hold them accountable. How's that? Good opening there? You want to say anything? You want to add anything before I go? All right.
Go ahead, guys. Any questions?
When will officers decide to back off of a pursuit?
Well, the policy is pretty clear. I mean, they have to evaluate that. Much of what we do is very subjective, right? And the officers are going to evaluate that, and the expectation is that they're constantly weighing all of the circumstances that are occurring in the pursuit. Once again, this has been consistent with our policy over the years. But what we are allowing for is if we have additional resources in place that can mitigate those risks, then we are giving them more latitude to be able to pursue for greater length of time, or for a particular crime that maybe we hadn't before.
What kinds of crimes?
Well, things such as stolen vehicles, still felony related, high risk type stuff. But we are seeing challenges around not being able to pursue people And I believe the risk both to the community as well as, once again, solving these crimes and trying to deter future crime and violence, it's important.
So one piece of language that I understand is in the policy itself is that pursuing officers must be objectively reasonable when deciding whether or not to pursue a suspect. How does one measure what is objectively reasonable in a situation like that?
Kevin? I told you you'd get the hard ones.
You'll hear the term a lot, totality of circumstances, and I know it's kind of a vague, broad term. It's intentionally designed to be that way. So, a pursuit during the daytime hours in a school zone is dramatically different than a pursuit at nighttime on a freeway. The severity of the crime, you weigh the severity of the crime, the danger the suspect presents to the community. A car theft suspect is different than a homicide suspect. Your abilities to drive your own vehicle's handling characteristics matter as well. Other resources you've got in the proximity to help resolve that pursuit quickly and mitigate the risks, whether it's there's air support or plane in the air that can keep an eye on the suspect and allow you to back off and create some distance, or other vehicles ahead of the pursuit that can put down spike strips, or use other vehicle intervention techniques. All of that stuff matters, and it's a bunch of information that we're asking officers to process, but that's our expectation, is that they're familiar with the risks involved. They're weighing those things carefully and making an informed decision.
And then I just want to add, every pursuit, there's an after action done. There's a report filed afterwards that's reviewed throughout the chain of command, including in the chief's office. So these don't happen in a vacuum, like, oh, this or that. We actually require then that there be a follow-up investigation, and all those things are measured and weighed. Go ahead.
Who can authorize a pursuit? Is it any officer or is it only supervisors?
Well, the officer is the one that initiates it, and then they are required to broadcast the appropriate information. Anybody can terminate a pursuit at any time. So, I can be...
Anyone initiated pursuit?
Anyone, any officer can initiate, as long as they're within the guidelines that are set out in the policy. But yes, they can initiate it. But also it can be terminated at any time by anybody involved.
Can you speak about the elimination of speed requirements? What is the current policy and how does that change 30 years ago?
Elimination of speed requirements. I didn't bring the policy with me because I just came from. Can you touch on that, or do we need to get back to him on that?
Speed requirements for vehicle interventions? Yeah. So we've looked at over the years. One of the vehicle intervention techniques we use is the pursuit intervention technique. It's wherein your police car makes contact with the suspect vehicle, spins it, and it gets to stop. Over the years, we've looked at speed caps for that maneuver. The reality is there's no empirical data that shows that speed has a direct correlation to the safety of that maneuver. It's more about the environment and the way you use it. So we've eliminated that I guess, black and white speed cap and moved to that, again, totality of circumstances. Is it objectively reasonable based on where you're at, when you do it, how you do it? Those are the factors that matter.
And just, do you know, I happen to know, this is a bit of a quiz question, do you know what the current policy has in terms of speed requirement for vehicle intervention techniques?
I don't. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I was talking to Kevin. He said we could look that up online. But I do want to just ask you, as things are going forward and as this new policy is implemented and you look back on incidents, what metrics will you be looking at in terms of evaluating whether or not this change in policy is a success or failure? Is it crashes? Is it public property damage? Is it injuries? Kind of what will you be looking at to figure out if this is working?
Right. All of those certainly be a factor, right? I mean, it is not lost on me or anyone in the organization that we are in the risk mitigation business. And, that's the challenge that we face in turn to intervene and intersect violent behavior and violent crime is trying to do that with the minimal amount of impact to community and to our officers. So, the risk here is really across the board. But we will, as I said, do careful evaluation of every event and weigh, the effectiveness. Are we able to, see a decrease in the number of, stolen cars or successful, burglary arrests or things, maybe, a decrease in speed racing because they know that there's some intentionality now behind our actions that we didn't have before, or that we have some authority that we didn't have before. So all of that's going to have to be weighed. I've asked that this policy be reviewed within 1 year, which is unusual. Typically, we're on a longer cycle. I don't know if it's 2 years or more, but I've asked that we have this marked for review within 1 year. And we're not, restricted to that. If, we can review this in 60 days, we can do it in 90 days, whatever it might be. So we're definitely going to be keeping our eye on the ball on this to make sure that we're meeting the standards and the goals that we have, which is to really continue to increase our effort around reducing crime and the fear of crime.
Can you speak at all to the people taking advantage of the current policy that's said in the report, like anecdotally, officers will hear from people that, yeah, they're going to try to outrun cops in Portland because they're not going to enforce anything. So can you speak to that at all?
Mike, or Kevin, you guys drafted the release. I have heard that anecdotally. My observations were more based around some of the video release. There's some studies out there that suggest that if we don't chase people, they won't continue to drive erratically. And we have shared some videos that demonstrate the fact that the people continue to drive at a really reckless, dangerous speed. So once again, we're managing this risk. Is it better to have an emergency vehicle that can provide some level of warning? And I'm not suggesting that even those people we would chase, because it may not be objectively reasonable. Every situation is different, but if we have a chance to provide a certain level of warning to the community, if we have a chance to put our officers in position to interdict that so that that person doesn't continue to drive at that's extremely high rate of speed, then I think we're better off. But we do have, like I said, the film stuff, the comments, the statements about people saying that's being reported to police officers, but I don't have a record of that personally.
Yeah, that's not something we can track.
Yeah, I know it said anecdotally.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to ask if you have anything to say to other agencies. You mentioned that there are other agencies across the country and they're making this shift. A few years ago when you guys cracked down on really stopping pursuits, that was a nationwide kind of wave of stopping. So what would you say to other agencies that are considering also making changes like this? I guess how we balance that community message of just the fad of changing pursuit policies.
Right. Well, I can tell you right now, nationally, the conversation around public safety is, an ever-shifting landscape, and it's certainly with 18,000 police departments in this country, there's a variety of opinions about what that looks like and how it happens. So each department, each sheriff's department, each agency has to be responsible to the community they serve. And my encouragement, though, is that in whatever observation or concepts they're thinking about around this, that once again, it be in line with not only community's desire for safety, but also organizational understanding of risk management and the risk that it poses to all of us to participate in car chases. At the same time, trying to address some of these really difficult issues that we're facing.
Do you hope this change in policy sends a message to criminals?
Oh, absolutely. I want people to know that are choosing to, violate the law, that we have every intent to try and arrest them and bring them to prosecution. That is a part of the role of law enforcement. Laws in our country are set up to provide a level of predictability and consistency for us to travel in the public space, to be able to move about freely and safely. I just drove back from Salem at a DPSST graduation, and I didn't just randomly pick some side of the road to drive on. We all came northbound on one side and everybody went southbound on the other side, and we do that so that we can travel safely and move about the public space. And I fully understand, in a whole other conversation about the justice system being justice or not, and the application of laws and the fairness of laws. So that is certainly a conversation that police are wrestling with all the time. But the fact is that they do provide some stability for us. And for those that can choose to intentionally violate the law, we are going to be making an increased amount of effort to enforce that and to hold them accountable, and then work with our other public safety partners, the county, the district attorney, and others, to make sure there's successful prosecution. Our retail theft missions are a good example of that recently. Our stolen vehicle missions, human trafficking, gun violence, etc. Yes, sir.
Are either of you two aware of feedback from officers on the street in your organization that there were times when they wished they could have done a chase and they felt the policy limited their ability?
Yes, the part of our directive review process is gathering feedback not only from the community, but also our membership. And they expressed feedback during that pursuit policy revision process. They did feel constrained, and they asked for the ability to pursue suspects in some conditions or some circumstances more frequently.
Was this shift in policy prompted by a specific incident that occurred either here or another city recently?
No, this is just a combination of events and our effort around, as I said, reducing crime and the fear of crime, looking at all of our resources, maximizing all that we have available us to try and have an impact on some of these numbers that we're seeing.
And just so I'm not confused later, can you just describe what the current policy is and where officers are required to abandon any pursuit according to the current policy?
I hate to speak to that without it right in front of me, but my guess is, and Mike will get this to them, to me, the standard of when to disengage is the same as the standard that we've had. We still, all the objective reasonable stuff that the captain outlined. So, what's changing here is we're saying there's more options available if you have these things in place. If you have these mitigating factors in place, you have more options to pursue, which we believe also reduces the risk. But, all of the factors that you have to consider are the same factors that you had to consider before in terms of, speeds and conditions and neighborhood or whatever it might be. So it's adding things to mitigate those risks, but those risks don't go away. We still have to be aware of them, if that makes sense.
Certainly, it's giving officers more discretion.
Yes.
Is if I were to sum up the policy change, is that the policy change?
So I would say the previous policy put some pretty black and white caps on when you could initiate a pursuit. It was felony person crimes or extraordinary circumstances. I would agree with the chief that the policy hasn't changed when you should terminate a pursuit. That's the same. It's about broadening the ability to initiate a pursuit. As the chief said, before 2017, we had a pretty broad policy. We did a lot of pursuits for traffic offenses, low-level property crimes. In 2017, we constrained that down to the felony person crime categories and extraordinary circumstances. This newest iteration of the policy doesn't really change that, but it gives the ability in certain specific circumstances where there's an organized, pre-planned mission, where you've got those other intervention techniques and resources baked into the mission, to initiate pursuits for those lower level offenses that, although they're low level offenses, have significantly impacted the livability of the city of Portland. Again, like the low level auto thefts, burglaries, the speed racing issues, all that stuff. Before you couldn't initiate a pursuit, but now you can if you've got other resources in place. That's how I would characterize it.
Right. I mean, the practical example that I've used internally is, I'm working graveyard shift in Southwest Portland, and I show up and a car's leaving the scene of a burglary. And I'm all by myself, and I can get into a pursuit. I don't want that. That does not fall in this category. That wasn't allowed prior to this, and it's not allowed now. I have a particular part of town where a burglar has been hitting consistently over a period of time. And so we now bring together an organized plan, a written plan that gets approved through the process, through the ranks, so everybody's on board, everybody knows what we're doing. We know that this bad guy or bad gal is going to hit, Mondays and Fridays for the last 3 weeks in the Pearl. So then we have the plane, and we have some undercover officers, and we have a canine, and we have cars positioned. And now we see the person driving away from the burglary, and that person runs. We can engage in that pursuit. All of the factors that they have to weigh are the same as the original policy, but they are allowed to engage in that pursuit, whereas that lone officer who just comes across that burglary would not. Now, if that lone officer saw a homicide and saw somebody get in a car and drive off, they'd be able to chase them regardless of this change in pursuit. But that's what we're doing, is we're trying to be able to provide some structure for some of these chronic issues, not just so that officers are out there continuing to chase people. The vast majority of the work is still going to be around the current, the pursuit policy as it exists today. This creates that latitude and discretion for when we have a more structured approach. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And just to clarify, and under the old policy, even if there were the planes and the
Right,
support,
they could not
they could not pursue because
Right.
it was a burglary. And
Right,
not a person.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
So this gives us some opportunity to pursue those. And what we're finding, street racing, stolen vehicle emissions in particular, a lot of guns, people have been killed. I mean, there's some very serious violent crime associated with that behavior that in our old policy said, well, it hasn't risen to this yet. We believe if we can interdict that sooner, then maybe we can prevent that. That's the goal.
And I do just want to ask one question, because I'm sure that some folks are not going to be, folks may not like the idea of officers engaging in pursuits in general. And so you mentioned that without officers pursuing, suspects are already driving erratically. What will adding officers pursuing that erratic driver add to public safety?
Right, right. Part of my belief is that we'll be able to provide a warning with lights and sirens, so we'll be able to provide some kind of warning, hopefully. But, too, then we'll also be able to have eyes on to be able to put people in places ahead of it. This is where we have spike strips. This is where we have these other pursuit intervention techniques that the captain mentioned. So, if this person is already driving erratically, for this crime, then we're going to be able to not only provide a warning in that moment, but also better position people than just to wonder where they're at until the crash or the bad thing happens.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Anything else? Yes.
What consequences exist if a police officer is to step out of the normal policy?
Well, we have a discipline guide that we follow, and so it's just going to, once again, based upon, the actions, the decision making, did they consider the guidelines and the policy and follow those? So, there are officers in this country, and our officers are aware of it, who have been indicted because of their performance in pursuits that resulted in, terrible outcomes. So it's not lost on any of us the seriousness of what we're taking on here, and I express that in my communication to the organization, my expectation that we have strict adherence to the policy and the guidelines put in place for it.
They may not know what an after action is. Can one of you maybe just talk about what that is and how much it's reviewed every single time we're engaged in a pursuit?
I'll leave that to you, Cap.
So anytime, there are a couple of things. Anytime there's a pursuit, part of the directive of the policy requires that a supervisor monitor and manage that pursuit. At the conclusion of the pursuit, a supervisor is required to do an administrative review of the pursuit itself. The form is actually called an after action. They complete review and evaluation of the pursuit. Was the officer act within policy, within training? That goes up to the chain of command, to the precinct, to the lieutenant, captain, commander, to the chief's office. All of that is at each level. They look at it and either agree or disagree whether or not the pursuit is within policy or not. If it's not, it's referred to internal affairs for an investigation. And then we also collect the data from the pursuits themselves.
And another topic that didn't really come up, and maybe Franz, this is for you, but we've done a lot of training in pursuits, engaging in pursuits and pursuit management, and that is kind of something that we do on an ongoing basis. So maybe just remind folks, what every officer has gone through in terms of the amount of training in emergency vehicle operations and pursuit management.
Sure. So officers, when they come through our advanced academy, get a certain amount of pursuit and vehicle intervention technique training. They do dozens of hit maneuvers during that advanced academy training. Our tenured members come through in service every year, and usually at least every other year or so we'll do some police vehicle operations training. We're actually going to be doing some advanced police vehicle operations training in January and February of next year out of Portland International Raceway, where they'll be practicing, vehicle handling at higher speeds, vehicle interventions, the pit maneuver, braking distances, all that stuff. So.
To that point, in case it hasn't been mentioned, it's 30 days until this takes effect, so it's going to be mid-January, and additional training's been pushed out today, along with this policy announcement here in the Bureau, so there'll be more training for officers.
Any idea how many officers have taken that advanced driving training?
The one that's scheduled for next year.
That's scheduled next year. Do you know how many people are?
We'll be putting all of our operations branch uniform members through that training. So every officer and sergeant assigned to the precincts and our focused intervention team will be in that training.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I also want to say, while we're on the front end of this PPB, I think this is something we're going to see more of. I mean, just this week it was reported up in Washington that Initiative 2113, I believe it is,
All right, hi there. This is Greg Nimbler, just letting you know we are live. It looks like the feed did cut out on this press conference as we were watching this. We're going to give it a second here to see if that comes back, but I'll go ahead and start summing up some of what was said during this very long press conference. A lot of information in there. To kind of whittle it down, basically the Portland Police Bureau is changing the policy that they have in place regarding pursuits. And currently, so in 2017, I'm going to pull up my notes here. 2017, this is when they started this, where pursuits could only happen if there was a felony crime or extraordinary circumstances. Otherwise, officers were instructed to not pursue in the interest of public safety. This has been changed somewhat to allow, in mitigating circumstances, officers to make that decision to where they can go ahead and make that pursuit. It does look like the feed is gone. We do have, we'll have whatever else was said in that once we get that information. We have somebody on site. So for whatever reason, the video cut out there. So again, to sum this up, given certain specific circumstances, officers will be able to make a decision to engage in a pursuit. This includes things for like burglary, car theft, street racing, allowing for circumstances being in place that may assist in a pursuit and still not endanger the public as a whole. They said things like maybe knowing that they have a spike strip somewhere, maybe making the decision of whether it's a freeway or running through the middle of town. So those are circumstances that they can now decide on and make a decision in the field in that moment, versus before it was a pretty black and white policy of they cannot pursue. They said that all of this is going to be implemented within about 30 days to where these policies will go into place. They said if an officer, as far as oversight, if an officer decides to pursue someone and proceed to get into a car chase, essentially, that a supervisor will be monitoring it, and at the end of that, whatever the conclusion is, then there will be a report generated to decide whether or not this was, what happened during that pursuit. This is what's going to be going into place. So a supervisor will review it, and then they said within a year of this policy being implemented, which will be starting in about 30 days, within a year, they're going to review this and take a look at as far as damages, as far as what's happened during these chases, and whether or not this policy is effective or not. But again, the entire goal here, according to the Portland Police Bureau, according to Chief Day, is to open it up a little bit more for Portland Police Bureau members to pursue some of these crimes that they previously were not allowed to do. We'll see how this works out. They said there will be a lot of review. They said they could even review it sooner than a year if they decide to, but these policies will go into effect in about 30 days, and they believe this is in the interest of being able to decrease some of the crime that we've seen associated with some of those other things, burglary, car theft, street racing being some of the examples that they gave. So that's a very quick summation of about a 30-minute press conference with that. There's a lot more details, of course, that we'll have at kptv.com. So if you really want to dig into it, head there and take a look. But again, it's Portland Police Bureau changing their policies to open up a little bit more for members to engage in pursuits with vehicles. So there you go. Again, kptv.com, we'll have all the details as far as what was said in there, a lot to digest, and we'll have more at our 4 p.m. news, so be sure to tune into that as well. We'll have coverage of everything else that's happening today, including details on this. All right, that's it for right now. We're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you for joining us. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.